Hello, everyone. Thank you for attending today's webinar, Kubernetes Brings IT Together, presented by Platform 9 Systems. I'm Rebecca, and I'll be moderating this webinar. I'd like to start off by introducing today's speakers, Ron Haberman, CTO of Platform 9, and Stephen M. Saunders, MBE, the founder of Silverlinings QuestX. You can read their full bios on the left side of your window by selecting the Speakers tab. Just a few notes before we begin. To access additional resources for today's presentation, please click on the Handouts tab button on the left side of your screen. You can access closed captions from the bottom right corner of the video player. This webinar is being recorded. It will be available to watch on demand within 24 hours. We'd love to hear from you. During the presentation, you can submit questions you have using the Questions and Answers tab on the left side of your screen. We will be answering the questions throughout the presentation. Now, let's begin. Steve, please go ahead.
Hey everyone, and welcome to today's event. Kubernetes Brings IT All Together, which is brought to you by Silverlinings and Platform 9, a specialist in virtualized infrastructure management solutions. Look, like everything else in the cloud right now, virtualization technology is today changing at an unprecedented rate. And that presents a choice for businesses. Should they stick with their familiar legacy VM environments, or should they transition to newer, more efficient container-based solutions? Or does it? Is it actually possible instead to allow the old and the new to coexist, providing the best of both virtual worlds? Well, that's what I'm going to be talking about today with my special guest, Ron Haberman, CTO of Platform 9, a company that specializes in helping companies architect the most efficient, the most cost-effective virtual environments possible for their businesses. Hey, Ron, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
Thank you. Let's start with an obvious question and a big one. What are the challenges that your customers are facing right now when it comes to making sure that their virtualization environments are fit for purpose?
Well, there are quite a few, starting from maybe the most obvious question, which is this the right time to make any change? And I think, for the most part, and especially given the past few years, the answer was a resounding yes. You need to get more efficient. But how you go about it, and indeed, do you replace? Do you augment? Do you add? Do you run containers on top of VMs? Do you build a whole new system? Do you go to public cloud? All these things are open questions that, I think every dev team and supporting IT team are considering. And, in part, the struggle that we've been dealing with on to how to help them kind of like navigate it in the fastest way, but also a cost-effective way, so they don't end up doubling everything.
Well, there is this sort of appeal of the new in technology always, but there's also historically always been sort of a tipping point with some technologies where people realize that perhaps it's not going to be as straightforward to move to what looks like on paper it should be a better solution. Why shouldn't businesses just stick with what they have now, a legacy VM environment? What's the problem?
So let me first state that I hope that people recognize that it's not a complete black and white. And with any technology transition, it has never been a black or white question. So yes, there would be VMs that absolutely should stick and should remain and support the business, because it's, at least for some software, there is no immediate need to go and invest the resources necessary to modify it. But what most organizations identified is that some very basic capabilities of what the container systems give you, like intent-based orchestration primarily, the ability to scale the software directly from within the knowledge of the software, the way redundancy works, or auto healing, for that matter, would work, means that software can run in a dramatically more efficient way. Upgrades can happen in a much, much more efficient way. You can push new software into production, creating new experiences for your customers in a streamlined fashion. And all that can happen while your platforms teams, your DevOps teams actually have a much, much easier time than before in creating the cloud, in maintaining the cloud, et cetera, et cetera. So when an organization looks at like, okay, we have X number of workloads, we're planning to do a few more, where, is that magic bullet of, the new ones I think are obvious. Yeah, if you're going to build a new piece of software, that should go on the new platform. But given the interconnections between modules, it would also make sense to start converting to microservices, and with that, moving to containers and a much more robust type of orchestration. And the question
But
that
you're talking about, yeah, go ahead, Ron. Sorry.
The piece that was always lingering is that, okay, but what's going to happen like with the full migration? I kept on hearing, well, but we have this much, and like the first it's going to be this much. So what's going to happen in between? And the issue in the industry was that it was a bit like all or nothing, right? You keep the old pretty much as is, and then you build a new system for the new workloads. And you have to manage them both at the same time, and you have to increase one versus the other. And that's exactly the issue that we wanted to tackle, to say, no, let's, if assuming a blank, piece of paper, is there a way to just move to the new world in a way, yeah, and bring whatever you need for supporting that move with you into that environment.
Give me an example of a VM that should stay intact right now if you're on this. And by the way, I think you're exactly right. It's a journey, right? And it's not like you just leave one station and arrive at the next. That's not how these environments are working at the moment. So just to really reinforce that, there needs to be a migration, and it's not all or nothing. But if, with the clients that you're working with, the customers you're working with, give me an example of a VM that typically they might leave alone while forming a policy that, well, it's new, so we're going to do that. We're going to containerize that immediately, or use microservices for that.
The most common scenario is that, for example, you have an application that dependent on a database of a certain type. And that database, is legacy. There are hooks from the application into it. Obviously, that VM is very persistent. Yeah, I mean, it needs to contain the data and store the data, and that's the job of that particular VM. Now, the vendor of that database may or may not have created a roadmap to containerize, but you have a certain version and you have a dependency on that version. Now, all the logic that needs that data could be moved to containers fairly easily, but the database itself will need to be there to support the applications for years to come. So where do you begin, okay, with this transition, and what do you do with that database? Another example that happens quite often, and I come from the telco world, where it's very common, right, to have fairly legacy support. A standard was created 20 years ago, and it's been enhanced over the years. But there is some code that was created 20 years ago, and it's still there, right? I mean, why? Because there might be some device somewhere still using an older version of the standard. Now, there is no future, okay, for enhancing that capability. It's there, it's working, it's supporting the devices. New devices will come along and work on a newer standard and will replace the old. But for the most part, as long as the organization is collecting revenue for running that application,
leave it alone. Leave it alone.
Leave it alone, right?
Yeah.
Now,
exactly.
That's right. So the question is now, okay, do you just really leave it alone, or do you at least try to create some benefit on the operational side by keeping the application alone, but bringing it to a more modern way of managing the platform on top of which it is running.
And so, just to be clear, in terms of traditional VMs versus the modern alternative, we're really talking about Kubernetes here, right? Containerization and on private cloud, I'm guessing, right? That's the destination for most of the companies you're working for that you're helping with this migration.
That's most of them. They didn't all necessarily start with thinking about private cloud. There's been a few years of a so-called lift and shift idea that maybe we just take all of the workloads that we have and push it to public cloud. And there was some hope there, right? That overall the business case will be positive for it. I think for the most part now it's proven that a simple lift and shift to public cloud, does not yield necessarily a positive business case. So some customers are actually now bringing back workloads from the public cloud and into the private cloud. Others that kind of never left or never fully left are now more, in tune with, okay, what really is the need in terms of improving operations, reducing costs of different kinds, and modernizing all at the same time. And it might be obvious, but the new economy created a need to go back to basics in a way, right? I mean, I remember the fun from 3 years ago where growth was the absolute number one thing. And it doesn't matter how much it costs us to do something. If we can go faster, it's better. Now, margin is back to being important and ongoing costs are super important. So yes, we see the need to go fast, but it has to have an immediate benefit. It's not, just build blindly for the future.
So the business case, the TCO and the OpEx is now front and center in the technology, whereas initially there was sort of almost like a gold rush or a desire from companies to really just invest in cloud at all costs, and cost is the key there, isn't it? Because I think that was the main problem, I guess, with the people who did take that path into public cloud, was that it was more expensive than they realized it was going to be. Is that right? That was the main issue, or was it also management?
I think so. So cost was definitely number one. Management, I would actually put the migration itself second and the management third. Yeah. So you plan to go to a cloud, and the first few applications, go well because that's the demo. And then you find out, but wait a minute, these type of workloads have never been designed to get the auto scaling capabilities that make it logical to run on dynamically available hardware. And you slowly see more and more of these workloads that, maybe have an hour or 2 hours of peak time a day, basically taking resources, namely burning your money all the time. Now you could, but you're on a project, so you continue, and you bring some more applications which might not translate to public cloud as easily. So you have some professional services costs in trying to get the migration going. And then you find out that management of these environments require different skill sets. And let's not forget that you still have the old system. So you're not exclusively replacing your skills. Yeah, you need to augment them. And for a long time, okay, you're going to be running two very, very different platforms requiring very different ways of management. And it's really, it doesn't have to be this way. Yeah, I mean, you can make it much, much more easily, make the transition more easily and actually reuse the hardware that you already paid for. Yeah, which is something that rarely gets talked about. That yeah, moving out of a private data center sounds very tempting, but you're probably on a depreciation schedule for hardware that is, perfectly fine to sit there and kind of continue to make revenue for you, which otherwise will go to waste.
I mean, it's a universe of ambiguity. You've got public cloud, you've got private cloud, you've got legacy VM, you've got Kubernetes, you've got all of these options. But Platform 9's role is sort of Switzerland in there, isn't it? Because you will support the environment that makes most sense. And in many ways, it's almost like a jigsaw puzzle that you're putting together for people and helping them manage. Where do you start the process of doing that with companies? What's the first question you ask them, and typically, what's the biggest problem which you're looking to solve? And talk us through that, how you work with them, and how you get actually embedded into their universe, into their business to help them.
Yeah, so it's interesting because actually the first set of questions, and I know that we're here to talk about Kubernetes and VMs and migrations, but usually we start with questions that have nothing to do with technology, which is, what is your business goal? Why do you care about going cloud native? Why are you interested in migrations altogether? What are you trying to achieve? That would drive the conversation towards how technology can help in achieving these goals. And it's actually been quite fascinating. I mean, sometimes responses range from, I have this particular new idea that I'm going to develop and I want to do it, quote unquote, the right way, all the way down to the response being, well, my CEO told me to move to cloud. So I'm trying to move to cloud, and pretty much everything in between. After we get an idea of like, what are the business goals, where does the cloud strategy sit in the overall strategy of that particular organization, we dig a little bit deeper into the timelines and into the particular workloads that might make a big difference. And for those usually are divided in two parts. One are, let's get some legacy moving. Okay, so moving legacy requires running, some new code on containers and some old code on VMs. It's going to have, a schedule. But for those, the platform that we provide that is containers and Kubernetes based, but also can run VMs pretty much as they were migrated in, creates a very smooth transition, right? As you modernize the workload, which can be built from dozens of containers and multiple VMs, you essentially replace code from running in a VM into running in a container. And the more you do that, the more you enjoy obviously the dynamic nature of what Kubernetes brings you. And then workloads that obviously are designed to bring new revenue needs to get designed into a container-based system. And that's where our consulting services can come in and really help organizations understand what is it that they need in order to be successful, what cloud native design actually might look like, in the gold standard. What other ecosystem elements beyond Kubernetes they might require for the paths and for supporting services for the workload itself, and how to onboard, those components. Yeah, and what I found is that when we talk to an organization and they start, digging in and unpeeling this onion, they recognize more and more options. And options are usually good, but we have a lot of options in the CNCF universe, which can create some confusion. Now, the number one topic always comes down to, well, where are the people going to come from to help set up, do the deployments, onboard the different elements? What would, day 1 and 2 operations might look like? Who's going to do the upgrade? Who's going to do commissioning? Who's going to deal with security? How are we going to deal with patching, et cetera, et cetera? And that's where I think, a lot of organizations failed in the past, and what we took upon ourselves to help primarily with, which is your team, should be busy with the value creating software. Supporting platforms are there to do exactly that, to support your business. So wouldn't it be very, very good if somebody else that is an expert already can help you with management of these day 0, 1, and 2 operations, and support your organization with all these activities such that the skilling up will be focused on building new software and learning, and of course at the same time just maintaining the systems that you have in place. So long answer to a short question.
Not really. I mean, actually, I don't think it's. I think it's. I think we may dig in a little bit further. What you're describing at a very high level as well is also this challenge which businesses have at the moment, where they feel like they work for the cloud, and that's not how it's supposed to be. The cloud's supposed to work for us. And when you talk about business outcomes, I hear that over and over and over again. It's like, yes, everybody knows what the benefit of cloud computing and virtualization are. But if the implementation of it outweighs the benefit, which it has done bluntly, because it can be extremely complex, and we're living through this sort of cloud revolution at the moment, then you have a problem. So what is really needed there are these pragmatic solutions, like the ones which you're talking about, and which Platform 9 has, which come in and kind of reorientate the technology so that it's serving its master again, or mistress. We just had a question from the audience who's saying, essentially on this topic, how do you deal with the fact that running 2 environments based on 2 different paradigms requires 2 different skill sets and expertises, and as a consequence increases the cost of remaining on the legacy approach? And that's really what you're talking about here. But can you just drill in a little bit to what I get as a customer? I mean, obviously there's a management console, right? How does it deal with those 2 different universes? Does it sort of surface information about the VM and the container in a common methodology, so I can kind of manage both from one console? Or do I still have to kind of shift between the 2 worlds and learn 2 different ways of speaking to those different environments? Make it live for us a little bit, Ron.
Yeah. So in the container world, and alongside of Kubernetes, a project started to emerge called KubeVirt. And what KubeVirt provides you with is the ability to essentially run a VM almost as is, KVM based, alongside your containers and essentially running inside a pod. So the approach is on 2 tracks. One, instead of creating a new system while trying to support the old one for a while, make the transition to the new world first. Okay? So you don't put 2 platforms next to each other, but you put a new platform in to which you move everything. That allows you to, as you move, learn how the new world behaves. And yes, it's still VMs, but they're running with the management systems and the constructs of Kubernetes. Now, to make it very, very easy, what we do is indeed we host a management platform that gives you the ability to see your containers, your VMs, your infrastructure, public cloud extensions, if those exist. It gives you the ability to get all the operations done from a centralized location, no matter how many data centers, colos, public cloud instances you might have. And then most of the heavy lifting sitting underneath that management platform, you get assistance from our team. we actually monitor these systems. So this management system actually resides in the cloud and connects to your instances. And it does, help from bring up, to ongoing day two operations. Now, we would help you obviously educate your teams as to how to get into this new world. And now that you're settled, right, you can start pushing new workloads that are obviously container oriented as new workloads. You would deal with cluster management under Kubernetes. You'll be able to understand how scaling works, and then you'll bring all the technology that help you manage, like continuous delivery, like Helm-based management of the containerized workloads, et cetera, into fruition. So we really, we try to avoid this, like dual management by essentially just flipping the equation, right? Don't slowly migrate over, put the new stuff in, move yourself into the new way of doing things. And the new thing supports the older workloads, and you will continue to support them for as long as you need it to. And maybe the next obvious question is like, well, how easy is it, right, to take the VM and quote unquote just move it? And we're a software company, so we have deep roots in how infrastructure was created. Founders came from VMware, and we have the programmatic knowledge to be able to go and essentially help you migrate your existing VMs from your legacy platforms into that new world.
And you provide the necessary training to manage the two environments from the new world platform, I'm assuming. That's training which you would offer people? Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean,
yeah. I imagine the people who work within the companies that you work with are pretty happy about this, because we're really talking about upskilling, aren't we, to the new world, while not leaving the old world behind. So I imagine the staff that you work with within these companies are probably pretty giddy about acquiring this new skill set. I mean, they get the best of both worlds, don't they? Really, they get the ability to operate in both universes, and that's an interesting opportunity for them. But obviously, they work for companies that are see this as a path out of being constrained by the current infrastructure and the legacy VMs. It's an unusual value proposition that you offer there at Platform 9. Is there a typical type of customer that this appeals to in terms of size, scale? Are there particular industries where this is taking off faster than others?
I'm not sure I can, think of typical, but I see, some patterns, forming. One, anything that has to do with edge type of computing, where, edge is a little bit of a loaded term, but, if you look at, what's happening with retail, what's happening with workloads that require lower latency, those tend to be very distributed. So you have a lot of locations with small footprint. And what happens usually with those environments is just getting the platforms delivered and installed in a traditional fashion, will require a truck roll, a lot of people involvement, a lot of time. And the way we automate the process makes it seamless. And the way we help with the management of the system makes it much, much easier because it's all centralized. That's been taken off. We see, quite a lot of success in, large tech environments where, they have both an internal big platform for where all the developers do their work, and as they push code out, into production, they need to connect the two worlds together. And usually those look anywhere from, let's say a small environment of having like 500 or 1,000 VMs up to the 10, 20, 30,000 VMs that, have some migration timeline. And just to give you some numbers, right? I mean, we have a customer that, when we started, we had something like 100 servers with them. They had 2 or 3, people in their DevOps team. And yes, they were very excited to learn the new skills. What made them even more excited is that now that they're running on over 2,000, nearly 2,500 servers, it's still just those 2 or 3 people, right? So they were able to increase,
Wow.
the system that they support by 10x, and still be very, very efficient. Really looking like heroes internally.
I bet.
And now, the most, I guess the emerging topic is, and I'm sorry, I'm going to use this term once, is the world of AI, right? So if we look at how much investment is going into creating models, we see quite a lot of companies now understanding that, wait a minute, maybe we should invest in putting some gear together, GPU enabled, get our modeling done in-house. Some do it with VM, some do it with containers, some have the mix, but it's a much easier business case to make when you essentially build it. And they have exactly the same question, right? I mean, we're data scientists, we're ML experts. How do we avoid essentially dealing with all things platforms? Can we get our workloads to quote unquote just work on this blob, right, that can support what we need to do? Those, I would say, are like the top 3.
Yeah, really interesting. We've got a great, it's not really a question actually, from one of our audience members, Marcos, who more of a statement. Before even contemplating any move, a deep discovery and assessment should be completed. I mean a deep discovery going down to the applications and OS libraries. Also, that process will outline what can be updated, left behind, or converted into microservices. I imagine you strongly agree with that statement, but how does Platform 9 help with the discovery process?
Yeah, I fully agree. There's only one part of it that is a bit questionable, which is there a reason to leave something completely behind? Yeah. I would argue that it's very rare, but the way we would go about it is, in the process that I briefly described, which is, what are the business goals? What is the inventory? Okay. What out of that inventory will make the most impact on reaching those business goals? And then practically, what is the order of changes that we need to create in order to go fast, but not take obviously the business down for any time? Yeah, I mean, you can't just take. Usually, you need to change the engine of the plane while in flight. Yeah, you don't have the benefit of parking the business for a while. So it's work. Okay, I mean, I don't want to make it sound like it's a breeze, but what we see is that if we can shorten the amount of time to take an existing VM and migrate it, I mean, physically, right? Take the bits and convert them. We can accelerate this process, quite a bit. And what we have found in discussions with customers is that most of them do not represent, any significant issue. So this methodology of let's build the new and migrate the old works nearly all the time. And that makes, the delta from discovery to the actual implementation starting to move a lot faster than it did in the past.
So instead of no man left behind, it's no app left behind, no service left behind. I mean, it makes an awful lot of sense, doesn't it? Because really, the only alternative to doing it this way is to run 2 differentiated environments, and that is going to be extremely expensive. But I mean, are there any sort of what's the word, security gotchas which we should be looking out for when undergoing this journey? Does Kubernetes, for example, does that environment present any security concerns to companies that perhaps have been used to hardening their traditional legacy VM environment?
Yeah. The security environment, I would characterize it as different, not necessarily more challenging. Now, different and security have a concern, yeah, because if you're used to any particular way of working, obviously making a change will create a pause for the CISO, and rightly so. Networking with Kubernetes looks different because it's assumed and it's usually always in layer 3. But the tooling also, matured over the past 4 or 5 years to the point I wouldn't characterize it as a gotcha. Yeah, I mean, you need to learn a few new tricks. Obviously, we're here to help. There is an ecosystem of tools and vendors that are there to support. The concept of zero trust is now matured as well. So the underlying platforms can be set up in that way, where workloads are not permitted to instantiate unless authenticated inside the VM. So all these workloads that have been migrated usually come with their own security infrastructure, and that doesn't change. Yeah. So anything that runs inside the VMs and how the VMs interact with the outside world can stay as is.
Great. I just want to point out, by the way, that there's an excellent handout for our event attendees today, our audience. You can click on the link in the left-hand side to get that handout, and that's all about migration issues and advice from Platform 9. I really recommend taking a look at that. It goes into more detail on some of the fantastically interesting topics which we're talking about today. Question here asking about what are the elements of cost that a modern Kubernetes platform reduces compared to a legacy virtualization platform? Where are the cost savings, and in what particular areas are we going to see the benefits moving to that?
Yeah, so let's start up the stack, as they say. When you move to a container-based platform, you, in most cases, get a benefit of better utilization of your hardware. So it would reduce the overall amount that you need in hardware in order to support the same workloads. In some cases, acceleration from the hardware decrease the cost even further. And we have customers that have moved from legacy platforms using the same hardware where they saw a 2x and even a 3x improvement in utilization, which obviously means they can put a lot more workloads on the same piece of silicon. Then you have licensing itself, and licensing of both the virtualization platform and the container platform is reduced greatly with our systems. And then once you actually get your infrastructure in place, you need to start considering what does it take in terms of OpEx in order to actually install and maintain this system. So you start with simple provisioning. Yeah, if you look at what it takes to get a legacy system provisioned and compare it to what a modern platform, with remote management, with automation put in place, being enabled, then you can expect a huge, decrease. I'm talking over 80% savings in the amount of time that your team will need to spend in things like provisioning. Now that the system is running and provisioned, you need to have staff obviously monitor and manage all different types of alerts. And of course, with good always comes some bad. So, we disaggregated this system, so we made them slightly more complex. And now tooling are there to make it better again. And again, in things like monitoring, you can expect 50% or more of savings. Then you get into troubleshooting, yeah, because let's face it, things will go wrong at some point in time, and you need team members that understand the different layers of the stack. So you either get all of them, or when you work with Platform 9, you don't need to get all of them because you get support from us. And again, depending on the case, we see people saving 40%, 60%, sometimes even more than that on the amount of time that they need to spend troubleshooting. And my favorite is what happens when you need to update something. Because I think it's one of the most critical areas where people miss or underestimate the amount of work and time and planning that would be required to perform. And you install the system and you do a POC and everything is great. And you say, oh, wow, this world is fantastic, right? I mean, got deployed very easily. It's great. When the upgrade comes, that's when you start, to discovering, a bunch of changes and dependencies that you have between the system itself and the system and the applications. And again, if you don't have the level of automation and support that you get from somebody like Platform 9, you're going to probably spend north of 80% more on the overall time. And in fact, we were talking to a customer that is finishing an upgrade with a competitor of ours before moving to our system. And they were talking about a process measured in months, right? Where obviously what you would like to see is a management plane where you can just click a button and expect things to get upgraded in the background. And then finally, you need to start bringing, workloads into the system. And again, you can spend the time to learn how to do all of it yourself, or you can get the support and education from us. We will give you hands-on help, okay, with the workloads that you create and third parties that you would bring. And we will do this in a teach the teacher type of a model where, the purpose for us is not to continuously have to do these things for you. It's really to give you the information in a way that, you would get upskilled and learn how to do it yourself. And, in the future, hopefully you can do it yourself. We're here to help, obviously, for as long as we work together, but the intent is not to keep you on the hook with training, but really to give you the tools to support yourself.
So that they can operate autonomously, but still using the platform, obviously. Actually, we have a question about the platform. Great question from Fabio in the audience. Can KubeVirt, which is your product, encapsulate non-traditional VMs such as firewall appliances produced by certified partners running on VMware clusters? I imagine, is that something that you've had to tackle?
This is one of these rare, great questions that are great because I have a very good answer for.
Okay.
We just onboarded a customer that is in the business of providing a bunch of network functions as a service. And firewall is literally the first one, okay, on the list. And we had quite an interesting discussion about certification, both with the customer as well as with the vendor of that of the firewall. And there are two things that I wanted to highlight. One, absolutely, every piece of software, whether it's running on a Windows VM or a Linux VM or otherwise, can run in KubeVirt. But two, there's a question of certifying it. It contains itself two parts. Yeah, there is the performance aspect of it, which I'll touch in a minute, and there is simply what is the virtualization technology that is required, and did that vendor, any random vendor, had seen it before? And the good news is that the underlying virtualization technology of the system is KVM, and KVM powers everything in the world, including public cloud. So nearly every workload from the past 20 years was certified on KVM, which leaves only that first issue of like, we need to make sure that we understand the performance of that firewall. Now, for firewalls, what Platform 9 does, or for any network function, we have quite a lot of telco networking related type of customers. So we created quite a lot of acceleration, taking advantage of both the virtualization capabilities, but also getting assist from hardware, things like DPDK and SRIOV and things of that sort, which greatly benefit things that move bits like firewalls. So we see in most cases not only that it is certified and that it works, but it actually performs better than it did before.
And can you quantify that performance improvement?
So I would say 10% from a very modern platform is almost guaranteed. If the legacy platform is slightly older, and that's why I'm being a little bit careful, because we have seen an increase of 3 times the performance.
Wow.
3 times. But obviously, it came from a fairly older system and will not be typical. Yeah.
Right.
But I think that a 10-20% benefit will almost always be visible.
Definitely worth having. Let me ask you, is there a big learning curve for administrators, operators in making this transition? How much time should your customers anticipate it's going to take them to get up to speed with all of the technology and the migration which we're talking about?
I would say that there are 2 phases to the learnings. The first phase assumes that you're comfortable managing the system essentially with a UI. Okay? And when you do that, the curve is not that steep because the UI is very intuitive. So we have, I would guess at this point, somewhere between 20 and 30 hours of kind of like hands-on support to get people comfortable with all the different elements of the UI and the most commonly seen type of things to look at. Okay. Now, the way Platform 9 works is that we have active monitoring of the systems. Yeah? So we don't just expect that the customer looks at the system, but we look at the system on their behalf. And that helps quite a bit because in most cases, we will start fixing a problem before the customer wakes up. Yeah, so we will notify them, we saw a problem, we fixed it. Just be aware that this is the issue. In some cases, it's still going on, so we will bring them in. So we're augmenting the customer platform team, which means that they don't have to become experts in the first week in order to be comfortable. Then comes that second phase of, okay, we're comfortable with how the system works and Kubernetes in general. How much more do you want to bring from the ecosystem of the platform? And how can you start taking advantage of the vast number of APIs we provide to essentially have your rest of the systems be automated together with our platform? Okay. And that depends on the comfort level, right? I mean, we have very advanced customers that are in the business of building software. And they, of course, want to go there very, very quickly. They want to consume everything through an API because they want the platform to effectively become part of their product. And we have others that, are more traditional in how they manage things and it's more static for them. So they primarily integrate with monitoring and logging portions of our UI. And everything you can see on our UI has an API, so it's no different really in terms of what's there and what isn't. But that's their main focus, and that would take another, let's say, weeks, right? Maybe at max like a couple of months to get all the integration done.
Very good. Well, we're coming to the end of the show, so I just want to remind our audience here, by the way, great questions, but we are going to wrap up soon. So if you have another question, throw it at us right now. Ron, it's really, this has been a fantastic conversation. I'm learning so much here. I'm going to start with a sort of metaphysical question. What happens in the long term with the traditional, keep on calling legacy VMs? Of course, they haven't been around, as long as the Roman Empire or something like that, but they are becoming, it feels like they're becoming superseded, obviously, by Kubernetes and microservices and all of that other stuff. So do they disappear altogether, or is it, are we going to have to build these peaceable kingdoms for the foreseeable future? Putting your prognosticator hat on, what do you think is going to happen over, say, the next 5 years?
I think, look, next 5 years, I think VMs are not going anywhere. Yeah, I mean, yes, workloads will shift from VMs and into native containers, but VMs will be with us. I would venture, I guess, and say that we're going to have them around for at least 10 years, if not more than that. And again, it's really just because some of them will continue to serve their purpose. It's perfectly fine, they've been dimensioned correctly. And it's really just, a matter of support. And I would like to remind the audience something that, I found out fairly recently that, the transition away from mainframe started, 30 years ago? But
Yeah.
we still have mainframes.
Still a lot of mainframes around. Still a lot of mainframes going out there. That's absolutely true.
The VMs are modern enough to I think go on a shorter ride, but
yeah,
I think 10 years is a safe bet that they're still going to be around and taking on workloads.
Yeah. Well, I've really enjoyed this conversation, Ron, today. And one of the reasons why I was excited to be able to talk to you is because the philosophy of the company makes so much sense. Rather than getting down into the whole sort of tech talk, cloud washing version of marketing, really the philosophy of the company is to start with the business outcome and work back from that. And then provide people through KubeVirt with a platform which takes them to the destination, but doesn't leave any passengers behind, right? And that's really exciting and incredibly pragmatic. I'm really impressed, and I do this for a living. So I really enjoyed this conversation. I just want to remind our audience here that there's some fantastic information in the handout, which you can get by clicking on the left-hand side of your screen. And I'm sure that we are going to have, there's also a great page all about virtualization on the Platform 9 website where you can go and check that out. And I know that this isn't going to be the last time that we talk to Platform 9 and to Ron, because this was a fantastic business technology conversation, Ron. I really appreciate your time today. And thank you again to all of our audience for joining us. Brilliant stuff.
Thank you. Thank you very much for having me. I had a blast and looking forward for the next one.
All right. Well, thank you. Thank you all for attending this Silverlinings webinar, and thank you for submitting so many great questions. I'd also like to thank our speakers for participating and Platform 9 Systems Incorporated for presenting today's webinar. A recorded version of this webinar will be available for you to access within 24 hours using the same audience link that was sent to you earlier. Again, thank you all for joining, and we look forward to seeing you at future events.